Now, just like a topological map, there might be a little something and then stuff like rock formations. There was a little erosion or a little eruption, and then the sands of time build over it and build over it and build over it, and you get the thing accentuated more and more and more. So you have a lot of unique personality characteristics. You're somebody. And you can clean up a lot of the superficial stuff, the symptoms, the manifestations. But the question is, what is the core of the illusion of separateness? The illusion of a separate psychological self. Now, the core of it, psychologists would treat as existing within this lifetime, saying you start out in the womb and you come forth from the womb, and then either through the trauma of the womb or through early psychological training, you start to develop a separate self. And psychologists would say, as I said, because I'm a psychologist, they would say that it was pre-symbolic, first 6 months of life, emotionally loaded central concepts of self. But the mystic spiritual tradition treats you as a continuing entity across birth, and sees that what you start with as a fertilized egg is not a blank slate on which an ego is written, but a very definite set of factors, predisposing factors, a very unique map already developed that is going to start to manifest as time goes on. And that is the result of previous births. And where does that go back to? It's the question of, how did separateness begin? It's what in Christianity is called original sin. It's the original act in which the entity becomes separate from the whole. It's the act of separation. In the biblical story, it concerns the eating of the apple and the committing oneself to be separate from God, separate from the Tao, separate from the flow, however you want to call it. And that sense of separateness, which is based on the original what's called sin, which translates as missing the mark, as Alan Watts used to point out to me. Sin, which means missing the mark, means that you lost the whole and you got attached to the part because you got attached to identifying with a component of the whole. The result is a certain separateness, and the minute you are separate from the home base, although you are still receiving your sustenance from the home base, you build a whole psychological model to protect your separateness and to justify your separateness. So that the first thing that is at the root of the illusion of a separate self is a sense of separateness from the whole, of breaking off from the whole, which is the result of original sin. Not sin bad and good, but sin choice to go against the flow of it all. You are all the descendants, not only descendants in the sense of father, 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 mother, 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 but descendants in the sense of incarnations of that which made the original sin. That's who you are. Otherwise, you wouldn't be on this earth. If you didn't have this separateness, you wouldn't have manifested as a separate entity. Your birth in a physical form is merely the result of that. Okay? You're just seeing the symptoms of it now. That's what you're dealing with here. And the process of going home, the process of becoming free or enlightened or liberated, means free or enlightened or liberated from all molds, from all models, including a sense of a separate self. So that you become, your consciousness, your identity becomes one with identity. That is, the Jivatman becomes one with the Atman, the small self becomes one with the large self, the separate mind merges into the Buddha mind, however you want to say that. And then there is this one mind and all these little manifestations. And at that level of reality, there's only one of us in this hall just caught in the illusion of our separatenesses. But we are only one of us. And if I go deep enough into me and you go deep enough into you, it turns out there's only one of us talking to itself. You hear what I'm saying? Okay. That's the process of going home. That's shedding away, like peeling an onion, all the levels of the illusions of separateness. Peeling away level by level by level. Now, if you take that separate entity, now cast out of the Garden of Eden, cast out of being in harmony with all of the forces of the universe. So now how does this separate entity deal with the forces of the universe? Well, as anthropologists will tell you, like Florence Kluckhohn, there are three strategies cultures have shown in dealing with this. One is man under nature, one is man in nature, and one's man over nature. Man under nature is total fear of the powers of the universe and propitiating offerings and all to the gods of the wind and so on, and fear of those forces that act that are much greater than the separate self. You feel you're suddenly this little tiny separate thing, while before you were the whole thing. Now suddenly you're this little thing, and all these other forces in the universe are no longer you. They're separate from you because you've defined your boundaries as your phenomenal self, as including my head, my eyes, my arms, my legs. And suddenly there's rivers and all that, and it's them. It's not any longer us. Hear that? So that many cultures develop a fear of them and surrender to it, not really surrender, but try to propitiate it. I'll do this, I'll give blood sacrifices if you won't destroy me. Man under nature, it's called. The other strategy of unconsciousness is the one the Western cultures take at the moment, which is man over nature. The power of our mind will solve all problems. That's what we say. That our separate mind will be able to rule the oceans, rule the heavens, rule the earth. We will be able to wring from the physical universe everything we need to maintain our separateness. In other words, ultimately, what they're saying is the human intellect is God. We can create our heaven with our own minds. The tension, neurosis, ecological crises, imminence of starvation, all of this shows some question as to whether man's going to succeed in doing that or not. But that is the one of man over nature. It's power of man in relation to the forces around it. The third one is the Taoist one, which you can read in the Tao Te Ching, which is man is as a separate entity but within the flow of nature. That's the more conscious one. That's the one we're moving towards now. We are moving towards a Taoist philosophy, and you people more than most of the people in the culture, of tuning with the flow of things, not bucking it so much, but listening to hear how it is, rather than deciding how you want it. This separate self, which is separate from the whole, has within it a sense of smallness. Now, that smallness is reinforced every time you're born because you're this tiny little helpless thing, and there's all these powerful forces around you. I remember once going to a science fair at the Boston Mechanics Hall, and they had a room that was designed for what it would be like if you were a very tiny child. And the toilet bowl was up there, and the sink was way up there, and the human legs were these huge things because you couldn't see above the kneecaps. And it was like you were living in a world of giants. And you felt very tiny and very, very impotent. Now, that's based on a psychological model. On the spiritual model, that comes from the original sin, from the sense of separateness, from you being separate in relation to the whole of the universe, okay? So there's two feedings in. One is this birth, and one is the whole spiritual history of your entityness, okay? Both of them feeding a sense of smallness, unworthiness, inadequacy. So it turns out that at the root of your separateness, at the root of this psychological illusion, is not only a feeling of separateness, but qualities of that separateness: smallness, unworthiness, inadequacy. Can you hear that? That you cover for the rest of your life with proving yourself. Achievements. Aren't I good? Look what I've accomplished. Do you love me enough? That's all based on overriding a basic core place of I'm not good enough, I'm inadequate, I'm impotent. Not necessarily in relation to other people, just a very deep feeling in there of unworthiness. And you are constantly even proving to yourself that you can do it. And that's what the whole achievement motivation is really built upon in the society, playing upon that. And the whole conditional love model. See? And the whole basis of psychological neurosis is, if you really knew me, you wouldn't be able to love me at all because I'm really no good. But I'll appear to be good and I'll do good things and then you'll love me. Okay, now you hear that as Genesis. Now here we are. We are human beings. We are attempting to go to God. Part of going to God, of going into God, means letting go of the stuff that keeps you from going to God. And the major stuff that keeps you from going to God is the model you have of who you are. That's the main thing, because that's feeding your sense of separateness. So, what your job now becomes is developing the discriminative wisdom, the sort of discrimination, to see that which is in you, which will liberate you, and that which is in you, which is keeping you from being liberated, and everything that is in you that is keeping you from being liberated, you give up. Now, you say, I can't give it up, that's who I am. Okay, there's one of them you give up. Right? That's called doubt. Right? And we have all of the traditional, we have the 5 hindrances and the 10 fetters and the 52 whatever it is. I mean, we got on and on and on categories of all the things you got to give up. There's ill will and anger. Okay? Any of you have ill will and anger? Is it getting you to God? Do you want to get to God? If you want to get to God, then you've got to give up the anger. But I can't give up the anger. I'm right. Doesn't matter. You want to get to God? It doesn't matter right, wrong. Get to God. You might end up being righteous, but you won't end up in truth. Righteousness does not lead to truth. I hate to tell you, this is going to be a real shocker to many of you who are extremely moral beings. You can become righteous as all get out. Everybody can say, what a righteous fellow. Isn't she's so good. You will not be liberated. You'll just be good. That will be nice. You won't make bad karma, you'll make good karma. But it turns out that karma is karma. And you'll keep taking births. You'll go to heaven. That'll be nice. You'll have like 1,000 years in heaven. You'll be a part of the angelic host. That'll be really groovy. See? You won't be liberated, mind you, but it'll be nice. Okay? Then you'll come back again. And next time you might be a little wiser. And you'll say, I want more than righteousness. Because righteousness is based on your seeing only as high as two, not as high as one. For in two there is good and evil. And most of the fundamentalist Christian religions are based on only seeing up to two, where they elevate the devil to having the same power as God. For they know not that the devil is but the other face of God, for behind the two is the one.